There's a vulnerability in Tomcat dormant for 13 years, which needs to be looked at.
So Ganesh, why don't you tell us about this this new high-risk vulnerability that's affecting Apache Tomcat?
Okay, yeah. This is called GhostCat, and I'll explain why it's really critical at this point of time. We all know Tomcat is there since maybe 20 years, as long as I think almost it goes hand in hand with Java. Mm-hmm. It's used as a middleware for Java middleware servers, right? So this GhostCat typically targets a Tomcat AGP protocol. So what it does is basically, I think it can give any attacker like ability to read a file, maybe directories. Also sometimes depending on the permissions, I think they can upload some sort of file which can trigger some action later point of time.
Right.
These are the two vulnerabilities. But the thing it's so critical is it almost affects all the versions like 9.x, 8.x, 7.x, 6.x. Mm-hmm. If you look back all these versions, basically any version released in the last 13 years are affected.
Wow.
And I think all these years it's been dormant and nobody basically figured it out.
Yeah.
And the score, CVSS score given for this is 9.8 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
Which is a very high rating.
Yes, that is very high risk.
Any way you slice it, it's very high rating.
Yes.
Coming to the Tomcat, I think in default configurations, it has two connectors. One HTTP connector typically listens on port 8080, mm-hmm. And AGP connector, which is, we talked about the AGP protocol, listens on port 8009 on interface 0000. I think this specifically talks about the AGP connector listening on this specific port. I think if it is exposed to some sort of, exploitation.
Okay, I see.
What's AGP? It's basically Apache JSON protocol. It stands for Apache JSON protocol. Mm-hmm. It's the optimized version of HTTP protocol by which Tomcat actually talks to the Apache web server. I think that's where this vulnerability exists. And there's one company, basically kind of Shodan kind of company, 1FE. They did some search for this specific devices looking for AGP protocol traffic. They found about 170,000 devices exposed with AGP connector protocol. I don't know how they did. I think the way they did probably is sending a HTTP request and looking at the response back, they figured out, they might be open to the internet.
Yeah.
The good thing is it's been found last month, but they released recently to the public internet because Apache already released the patches for all these versions.
Okay, cool.
So the fix is very simple. I think anybody running Tomcat needs to upgrade to the latest versions.
Which is a lot of folks. Tomcat's pretty popular.
Yeah, pretty popular. And other things, if it's not immediate future, it's not feasible to upgrade to the latest version, at least you can disable the AGP protocol, or maybe switch on the interface from 00 to the probably loopback address. Those kind of things will minimize the risk.
Right. Basically check if you have that exposed. Yeah. And if you do, fix that in some way.
I think based on what they said, I think almost all the Tomcat versions are vulnerable because any version of 9 to 6 are pretty much vulnerable.
Yeah, and that's a huge swath of versions. Swath. And you said it. I mean, it's basic in the past 13 years.
13 years, yeah.
13 or 30?
13.
Okay, I was going to say 30 is nuts, but
I mean,
13 is still pretty bad.
Yeah, I think Tomcat is around for 20 years. So 13 years.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Jaime, what are your thoughts on this story?
Not surprising. I mean, we have had a bunch of critical vulnerabilities affecting Tomcat in the last few years. So I think at this point, if you're running a Tomcat, server exposed to the internet, you have to, be really careful and at least, make sure that you have monitoring in place and you have, some kind of isolation of that asset. Because even if it's up to date, I wouldn't be surprised if, they're going to keep finding new vulnerabilities in the next year or so. So make sure that even if you patch, you have some ways of finding successful exploitation in the future and, isolate those assets as much as we can.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's very common. I would say it's probably very likely that in the future we're going to get more Tomcat vulnerabilities. I mean, it's old. It's at this point it's kind of old software, but we still have researchers banging away at it, looking for different vulnerabilities. And on this show, we've done stories about. I forget the name of the actual protocols, but we've done stories about software that's being exploited today that researchers have found exploits for today that were used 25 years ago, almost as old as I am practically. So it's not going to go away just because it's older, and Jaime is right. It's going to keep happening. So.
One interesting tidbit based on Internet Common Backbone, the view we have. Actually, yesterday, if I look back yesterday, there was a big spike in the number of scan sources on the specific port, 8009 TCP, but not huge. But if you compare back in the past history, like a couple of handful source IPs it jumped up to maybe 10 to 15 times. So that's a huge jump. I think people are looking for this port. And that's indicator, I guess. There's a definitely increased interest on this specific port at this point of time. And it's the right time to upgrade and maybe patch up to the latest and stable versions of Tomcat.
Well, I mean, it's always almost the right time. You should always try and update, and you should definitely always patch. But I mean, I can understand if you've got systems in production, upgrading to newer software is always a little scary just because it hasn't soaked all the way, and maybe there are some unknowns. But you're right. The fix for this, for folks who are affected by it, is update your systems, patch your systems, and if you can't update, maybe check if you've got if you're exposed on 8009, and if you are, change that. If you are exposed on that port, you can simply take that port down and close it so you're not exposed. So you don't actually have to upgrade. You just have to make sure that that port's not exposed.